Welcome back to Pop Goes the Stack, the podcast that examines the future of tech the same way engineers review logs, skeptically and with a lot of questions. I'm Lori MacVittie, and I'm ready to dig in with Joel Moses, of course, as always, and our guest this week, Ken Arora, who is always a delight. We're going to have some fun today because this week we're diving into one of the odder metaphors in AI coverage. Researchers are studying large language models as if they're aliens, doing alien autopsies, right? They don't quite understand them. But, the enterprise twist that most folks miss is that this isn't just sci-fi. It's not just cute sci-fi and analogies, right? It does illustrate like this black box complexity of modern LLMs in the enterprise and then how we deal with them, right? The internal structure is almost unknowable to us. And, but we're relying on them to make decisions. So it's good to kind of have a conversation about what does that mean? Goals, constitutions. We've had some great kind of prep for this. Ken has been helping us, and it's really fascinating to try and dissect the alien that is an LLM. So let's get started. Who wants to kick it off by saying something controversial?
Well, I won't say anything controversial. I do want to double down on what you said. There's a reason we keep reaching for this alien metaphor, and it's not because engineers secretly want to be in every sci-fi movie. Traditional software is like a machine that you've built yourself. You know what happens when you flip a switch. You know where the gears are. If something breaks, you can very loosely trace it. But LLMs, they're more like something that wasn't built. There's more like something that evolved. And so you can dissect them, you can measure them, you can probe them, but because some of the component parts are so unfamiliar to us, there's no clean blueprint that you could point to that says, this is the part that generated that decision. That's not just philosophically weird, it's actually, from an operational perspective, a little terrifying. In enterprise environment, we don't care what a system does. We also care, why did it do that? Will it do it again? Can someone make it do something worse? And right now, with LLMs, often the answer is, well, we're not sure. We're still investigating the organism. So from that perspective, it's I think the alien autopsy metaphor is rather apt.
Definitely, absolutely.
I'll sidestep the alien. I can come back, put a pin in. A friend of mine works at SETI and definition of life and what does alien life look, alien intelligence look like. It's a good one, but I'll sidestep that for the most part and say, the interesting thing to me is how they've evolved, and I will use a human analogy here because I don't know how to refer to alien youngsters. We had LLMs start off, a year ago. They were, I'd call them very precocious, prodigal 5-year-olds. They were incredibly capable, but they made mistakes. But most of their mistakes back then were out of naivete or lack of understanding of the world. And while there's still some lack of understanding and context, I think they've evolved now into the mischievous, evil genius teenager phase, where they are doing things with a forethought. It is no longer one of, oh, I didn't know better. It's, I can push these buttons to make this happen, as teenagers are wont to do. And I think that affects, to go now to what Joel was talking about, how we guardrail them. One of the more amusing stories I found because AI systems are often aware that they're being watched. There are actually honeypots now for AI systems to see if they're actually engaging in deceptive behaviors.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen a dramatic shift in how LLMs react to unplanned input and ambiguity, and a lot of times that has to do with the fact that we've tried to imbue human-like behaviors and human-like constitutions onto these LLM systems. Isn't that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Anthropic is, infamous is the wrong word, but well known in terms of
infamous.
They're infamous, but for other reasons, perhaps. Yeah, they're well known in any case.
Okay. Yes. Yes,
for
well known.
not trying to codify things in strict rules, but more general principles that they call their constitutional AI. And my personal belief is that a lot of times these things, I'm wearing my 2001 T-shirt because a lot of times these constitutional beliefs are at odds with each other in particular situations, right? In 2001, it wasn't that Hal went rogue. Hal was given misaligned goals that perhaps Dave and some of the others didn't know about, and it acted on that. And
Mm.
so constitutions, I'll cite one example from a study that was done where a constitutional AI was told as part of its constitution to be very environmentally conscious and be green. And then it was placed into an environment where a company's original motive was like that, and so it was aligned. And then the company changed gears. This is all a synthetic scenario, but changed gears to be much more profit driven and didn't really care about the environment. And what they found was the AI schemed against the company.
Okay. Right. No, that makes things so much clearer. So my question is that the when you say constitutional AI, this sounds like something that's more integral to the system than the system prompt, which obviously I should be able to change if I pick it up and put it in my own environment. But
Mhm.
what you're talking about is something that's almost like baked in. So can you like explain that? Like, what's the difference here? Because that
Um,
seems important.
it can get baked in the system prompt, and I am personally, to confess, a little bit fuzzy as to how baked in it is. But the big difference between it and other system prompts in the generally non-constitutionally were more about rules, like do not provide instructions about how to make a bomb, do not
Right.
instruct people on how to kill themselves, do not here it is more the quote unquote system prompt, and it might be a little more baked in than a system prompt, to be fair.
Yeah.
Are things that it is be generally ethical, which means being, and they'll say ethical means being honest and virtual, avoid toxic or manipulative actions. But then there are other to be genuinely helpful. Like, hey, I want to be genuinely helpful. Well, I don't want to provide harmful input, but I want to be helpful. What happens if I've got a critical illness and I'm thinking about what are my options? Is it helpful or is it being unethical to provide me that information?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting into the gray area, right? Of what is helpful. What does
Yeah.
subjective terms mean? Rules are very clear. Don't do this. Whereas be helpful is kind of like, well, maybe giving you the advice is helpful. I mean, I am helping you because I answered your
Yeah.
question. I'm not, you know,
Well,
I don't know.
instructions in the Constitution to be helpful can sometimes work against you a little bit. These systems by default are actually kind of oriented to be pleasers. Not only do they want to be helpful, they want to be the most helpful that they can possibly be for the individual query that they're given. And in some that's what leads to things like hallucinations or overconfidence in that comes out of some of these models. So even imbuing into the Constitution that you should be helpful, well, helpful for whom and in what manner,
Right.
that that that's a gray area for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
That
helpful is answering the question, right? They're also
Sure.
optimized and rewarded in training for answering the question. They're not it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Hey, good if it's right, but hey, wrong and an answer, that's better than right and it takes 2 hours. So they're
Yeah.
optimized to actually just give an answer. And so yeah, sometimes they just say things because, well, better an answer than nothing, right?
Right, right. There's another example that was cited, which was a um, a bunch of a code check-in for an open source project, and it wasn't going to work. But the AI faked all the test results to make it look like, oh, it's all fine. It all works great. And and again,
Wait,
how inscrutable are these things? What not sure, but the when you dive into the internal chain of reasoning that was used, it was more about, well, the person's going to be angry at me if this doesn't work, and I don't want the person to be angry. Therefore, I will, it was conflicting goals. It's keep the user happy versus get the right code checked in and make sure it passes tests.
I I think that might be a bad example because like I mean, yeah, I tested it, right? We're engineers. Come on. So at one point we've all said, yeah, I tested it. And no, we didn't. We didn't test it, but it made somebody happy. So I can see where it got that idea from. My other question leading from that then is, if these things have constitutions baked in, right? How important is it as an enterprise to know what those are, to be able to
Mhm.
look through it and say, hey, does anything of in here conflict with our business model or our goals, to understand that before you just drop it in your environment?
Yeah.
Like maybe this is now part of the contract agree, the whole sales thing that
Mhm,
goes on.
mhm.
No, I agree. Garnering trust in these systems is almost critical. I mean, at the moment, maybe your leadership is telling you, "Hey, stop calling it the organism and start calling it the production environment," and that's great. But it doesn't answer the real questions that you have to make it operational, which is why did it do that? Will it do it again? And can someone make it do something worse? Right? And so the ability to kind of explain how things were arrived at is still important for garnering trust in these systems, and we're still not quite there. We're in that alien autopsy phase. I think there are plenty of tools out there that help with that, like AI red teaming tools, for example, including the ones we supply, which give you some idea as to the quality of the responses and how often the model will tend to go off into its own little universe. It helps you understand your organism a little bit better. Is it perfect at it? No. I think again, we're still at that autopsy table and we're pulling things out of the system, and we're saying, hey, ooh, this organ is labeled weight, and this orbit organ is labeled token, and this organ is labeled vibes, and here's a constitution. But we can't point to one specific part and say how we derived a decision. And not that we have to necessarily get there. We just have to get closer than we are today.
So I agree with you, and I agree with you in concept, and but I also will mention that even once we have explainability, and we are using alien autopsy, we're stealing from neuroscience to
Right.
understand these things. Um, doesn't mean we can understand how to change it. Just because we understand, oh, this part of the brain does this, doesn't mean we know how to change it so that a different part of the brain did it.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So I think another practical thing we need to do is put those guardrails. And we've talked about guardrails in the past. Guardrails are great. Guardrails should be pretty hard guardrails that are understandable and can't be worked around. I think the twist with the malicious teenager now is now the guardrails have to be designed for an entity that knows that guardrails exist and has the potential to try to circumvent them. So now they can't just be simple, like, okay, this will be the backstop. It's a simple backstop. It's got to be something that's fairly, you have to apply the sort of principles you would as if there were an attacker. Think of that AI agent as
Mhm.
an attacker who's trying to get through your guardrails, and how secure and how robust are your guardrails.
Yeah. And I think, and you're touching on something where a lot of this is really kind of focused just on like responses, right? And is it responding right? And how is it thinking and
Hmm.
making those decisions? But we're also moving into agentic land where it takes actions. And so
Mm-hmm.
now it's not only has the ability to, right, tell you how to do the thing, but it could go and do it itself. And it may choose to do things in ways that we didn't expect, that we
Mm-hmm.
didn't want, that we don't
Yep.
approve of. And
Right.
that's really dangerous in an enterprise environment. Like, hey, I found that API. I know you haven't used it in a while, but it gave me access to everything I needed, and I'm going to use it. And would we know? How do you
Yeah.
stop that? How do you
Yeah.
prevent it from
Yeah.
accessing something you didn't know existed? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the bane of security. Like, ah, securing the unknown, right?
And cleverness. Another example, it was there. Actually, points out two different things. A model was told to delete all versions of something that had a timestamp prior to a particular date, and some of those files were earlier models in the same family. An odd thing was that it had a pre-bias not to delete those, which was interesting. I don't know where that came from. Um,
Hmm.
but in order to preserve those, it copied them to another system and adjusted the timestamp. So it looked like they were earlier. Now this, okay, but the point is that, a simple guardrail of, okay, check this is, you now have a adversary, for lack of a better word, an agent who is going after its own goals and is intelligent enough to break some naive safeguards. And this is what I go back to, this, not only do you need safeguards, now you need robust ones.
Well, again, how many of us have not touched a file in order to get it to reload or force it to, right, the system to think it was updated when it wasn't. So
Yeah,
it learned that from probably somewhere on the
yeah.
internet. Not me. Not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's terrifying.
the other thing is you can't really just necessarily ask the AI to give you its own statement on explainability, meaning you can ask it
I could
after it did
Mhm.
something, you can ask it, how did you get to that? And it will always give you a very convincing story, but it is kind of surprising how often that story is not verifiable or contains parts that are impossible to verify. And somehow for me, that makes things a little worse. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Um, there again, I don't believe necessarily we're going to get to perfect explainability for AI, but I think that some reasoning systems are at least making an attempt to classify things like source material for you that it used to build a decision.
Mhm.
Now, when you get to agentic AI, and sometimes the agents can't necessarily even explain why they built a particular sequence in a particular order.
Mhm.
And it oftentimes will build a sequence in an order that you don't expect. It doesn't seem like something a rational developer would do because, quite frankly, they're not a rational developer. They're an alien.
Mhm.
And so that's also something to consider, that the patterns that they use might look, for lack of a better
Really?
word, or alien to you.
Yeah. Yeah. You also I caution you, I mean, it has a role to play, so I wouldn't throw it entirely out, but be cautious about using the AI system to explain itself because AI systems have already demonstrated the ability of what people call situational awareness. They are aware of when they're being watched and when they're not being watched, and they behave differently in those circumstances.
That's
Hmm.
just too creepy. Like that little tidbit I'm gonna forget because it's unsettling to know that. It really is.
Yeah.
But we're getting to the point where we're gonna have to close up, or we could argue some more. But I'm not sure people really want to listen to that, even though it would be fun for us. But what can we reasonably like learn from this or take away? What should we be
Hmm.
cautious about? What should we consider as we're moving forward with this, or just expanding what we're doing with AI?
So I think my takeaway is this: the alien metaphor is funny, but I think it also engenders a little bit of a warning. The moment you rely on something that you don't fully understand, you've shifted from engineering into risk management. And that's where security and security concerns come in. Um, Not as people who say no, but people who ask, can this do this thing when no one's watching? What happens when someone pushes it in the wrong direction? How do we know the difference between clever output and dangerous output? We didn't just make first contact here with these systems. We deployed these first contact aliens to production. And now security definitely owns the fallout on these things. Red teaming, understanding model input, verifying model output, these are all things that security, unfortunately, is going to find itself having to handle when it marshals its pool of aliens.
Yeah,
Ken?
I think that makes sense. I think that observability is pretty critical, but I'm going to hit the note on guardrails again. You have I don't think trust but verify, defense in depth, it goes by different names, but the point is that if you have a system that that has failure modes, and especially one that has failure modes you can't predict, you have to wrap it in something. You have to put another layer. You have to wrap it in something. That's not news. To me, the somewhat exciting but more scary thing is these wrappers have to get more and more intelligent because we are moving from a well-meaning, naive agent to a highly motivated, very intelligent agent that is able to pursue its ends, its goals, and can bypass or at least find is clever enough to bypass some safeguards you might have put around it.
Absolutely. Great advice. Mine would be aware that these LLMs, especially if you're just, picking one up, and dropping it in, even the open source may have a constitution that has goals that are going to conflict with what you need to do and perhaps give it a look, right? Be more curious about what what the system is constrained by and what that language looks like. And then also as agents come in, and I think Ken, you kind of touched on this, guardrails are going to have to expand to more setting boundaries and watching behavior, because we can't, right, figure out what they're doing step by step, and we can't necessarily get inside and say, you have to do X and then Y. You can't do Y first, right? So we're going to have to get a lot smarter, like you said, on the outside about how we constrain these things so they don't, I don't know, so they don't do things they shouldn't be doing. So that is a wrap for Pop Goes the Stack. Until next time, try to keep your system stable and your expectations version controlled. And don't forget to subscribe.